So these verses, 36 through 50, there was a lot that kind of happened in this verse, these section of verses, but I kind of want to give you a little forestory before this. If you read the beginning part of chapter 7, it actually re-quotes it in verse 7:22, but it says, "The blind were receiving their sight, the lame were walking, lepers were being cleansed, the deaf got their hearing back, the dead were raised up, and the poor had the good news preached to them." A lot was happening in this chapter. A lot was going down and taking place. And what was happening was there was this great crowd of people that were watching all of these miracles and signs of who Jesus was. And in this crowd, there were even included some Pharisees. There were even some Pharisees in this crowd. And that's where we come in on this story, is one of the Pharisees comes to Jesus and says, "Jesus, come eat meat with me. Come to my house and eat with me. Come spend some time with me." And it's not really clear on why he invited him, because we'll find out later on in the scripture that you read that he didn't really believe that Jesus was who he said he was. He wasn't really convinced that Jesus was who he said he was. But my idea is that he was probably wanting to build his own reputation, or to see if Jesus would perform some miracles in his house for a little entertainment. And there's some people who probably agree with what I say just because I read that out of a commentary. So it's not my own thought. So it makes sense, because if you don't believe Jesus is who he says he is, why do you invite him to your house? Well, he just performed a bunch of miracles. You saw him, so that would be pretty fun to see if he did it at your house. You heard something about water and wine, and maybe that would be cool to see. And not only that, but Jesus has built a reputation as someone possibly that could be this person that he says he is. And so it looks good for a Pharisee to have this guy in his house if he really is who he says he is. So he's trying to build his reputation. But as this is happening, as this kind of goes down, we read that this sinner comes in. And not just a regular sinner, a great sinner. Like, it goes into depth about the fact that she's a sinner. It calls her a sinner multiple times in the scripture. And there are people who claim that she's a prostitute. There's people that claim that she's Mary Magdalene, but it's neither of those people. It's just this sinning woman. And so we don't know exactly what her sin was, but we know that she was a sinner. She comes in and she goes straight to the feet of Jesus. And the Pharisee, his name is Simon. She comes into Simon's house, and Simon thinks to himself immediately, and this is a thought that he has, and we read it, it says he thought, if Jesus really was this prophet who he says he was, why would he be letting this woman with this terrible reputation, come and touch his feet? Because I promise you that Simon thought to himself, I am a Pharisee, and that woman would not be near me. I would not talk to her. I would not touch her. She is a sinner. I would be far from her. And so his thought is, if he is really a prophet, there is no way that he would let this woman come near him. And the best part of the story is Jesus knows what he's thinking. He doesn't say it out loud. He's thinking it. And Jesus says to Simon, "Simon, I have something to say to you." And Simon probably has a busted moment, like, oh, wow, what does he want to say? I haven't said anything. What is going to happen? And then Jesus starts in. He answers Jesus and he says, "Say it, teacher." And teacher was a sign of respect. And so he went from not believing that Jesus was who he said he was to calling Jesus teacher or master, as some of the versions say. And so he goes from, this guy's probably not who he says he was, but it'll at least be a good time, to, I think he knows what I thought, and this is scary, and so I'm going to give him a sign of respect real quick. Like many of us would do if we bumped into Jesus, we would all of a sudden change our walk, whatever it was, whatever we were thinking. We would be like, "Oh, I'm sorry, what do you need to say to me, God? What? And so it would just be an awkward moment, and I know that is what happened to Simon. He realized, I am busted, I am caught. And Jesus begins to paint this picture that for someone who has been forgiven much, loves much, and someone who has been forgiven little loves little. And as we try to understand the rest of the scripture as it comes through it, there are some customs that you need to understand. There was a custom in this religion, there were 3 that we're going to see tonight, that when you came into a house, you were greeted with a kiss. It's much like our handshake. Then your feet were washed, and not just by anyone, they were washed by the lowliest of servants in the house. That was the worst job in the house. You would rather work with the animals than wash the feet of the people who came into your house. And the reason is because they walked in hot, dusty, dry areas with sandals on. And I know this is about to get a little too grotesque for you, sorry, but they walked the same roads that the animals walked. And so when the animals, it was right there. And so sometimes they would step in it. And so they'd have dust and the animal stuff on their feet, and it would be sweaty and gross. It's hot. I don't know if you know how hot it is in the Middle East, but it's hot. I'm from there. I know. It's hot. I've been there. It's hot. You think it's hot in here right now? We're talking average temperatures of 90 to 125 degrees. And there is no air blowing, but when it does blow, it brings sand into your face. Like, this is not a fun adventure to go walking through this region at this time. And you didn't want to wash that dude's feet because you know what? Not who knows what's on it. I know what's on it. I don't want to touch his feet. So that was the lowliest job they had. And then the last custom, and I've actually talked about this before in a message I preached, A Fly in the Ointment, was the fact that they used ointments to be like perfume and almost like deodorant. And so there was a ritual that when you came in the house, they would take oil that was mixed with some spices, and they would use it as a perfume to crown you because, again, you were walking in this hot, arid, nasty temperature. It's just gross, and so you kind of smelled, and they didn't have deodorant. And so perfume was great. So they put it on you so that when you came in the house, your feet were clean, you were greeted with a kiss, and you smelled good. We can all hang out, and nobody's offended by your odor. And so that was kind of the customary ritual, but that's not what happened to Jesus. Jesus comes in and he's not greeted by any of that. But this woman comes in, this broken-hearted sinner. And immediately her tears are flowing, and she comes to the feet of Jesus, and her tears begin to wet his feet, and she takes her hair and she cleans his feet with her hair. The lowliest servant didn't want this job, but with her tears and with her hair, she is cleaning his feet. And then she begins to kiss his feet. The greeting was one of a kiss on the cheek, but she is kissing his feet to say, I am humbled by your presence. You are God above. You are the representation of God in my life, and I know that you are going to forgive me. And she's kissing his feet. And then she breaks this alabaster that she has upon his feet to anoint him. I don't know if you understand this alabaster concept, but she had a flask of alabaster, and that was a very expensive thing. You can find this out in, hold on, I've got it. No, I don't. It's in Mark somewhere. My brain just went dead. In Mark, it talks about another woman with a flask of ointment, and it talks about it being about a year's wages. Like, it's expensive. Not only is it expensive, she may have either bought it out of her sinning ways, I don't know what those would have been, or it could have been her dowry. A dowry was a gift that the father of the daughter would give to the soon-to-be husband's family as kind of the price. And a flask of alabaster would have been a dowry. And so that could be either one of two things, but no matter what it is very precious to her. It is either a year's worth of wages or it is her dowry for marriage. It's what she gives to her husband before marriage. And that is something important and precious and wonderful to her, and she breaks it upon his feet. Simon had thought, who is this woman that would touch Jesus? Who is the sinner that would come to the feet of Christ and touch him? And how would he even let her do that? And did Jesus even once stop her or say anything to her? No. He let her cry and wipe his feet with her hair. He let her kiss his feet and anoint him with the most precious thing she had, because he loves to be worshiped. Because he loves to be recognized for what he is in our lives. And how often are we forgetting to do that? How often do we miss the opportunity to offer a broken and humble worship to a God who is greater than anything we have ever seen or experienced? I think that Simon's issue, well, before I get there, let me read to you what Jesus says to him. This is in Luke 7, and it's verse 44. And it says, "Do you see this woman? I entered your house, and you gave me no water for my feet. But she has wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You gave me no kiss, but from the time I came in, she has not ceased to kiss my feet. You did not anoint my head with oil, but she has anointed my feet with the ointment. Therefore, I tell you, her sins, which are many, are forgiven. For she has loved much, but he who is forgiven little loves little. He kind of busts Simon right there. He goes from, I've got something to tell you, to this is what I want to tell you. Right before that, he gives the story about who would love God, who would love the person who forgives him more, a person who has a debt of 500 denarii or a person who has a debt of 50. Well, of course, the guy with 500 denarii is going to be a little more appreciative. If you owed someone $5 or $500, would you rather the guy for $5 forgive you or the guy for 500? Well, I mean, that's an obvious answer. It was almost like a duh question that he asked Simon. And Simon says, well, the guy who owes 500. And he says, well, you judge rightly, and now let me bust you with this. You didn't greet me. You didn't wash my feet. You didn't anoint my hair, and you invited me to your house. But this woman who is not even a part of your house, who is no slave and no servant, has come in and given everything she has to me. Her pride, her ego, her greatest possessions, and she has set them at my feet. I think that Simon's issue is one that we all face. And Matthew Henry said it this way: the reason why some people blame the pains and expense of zealous Christians in faith is because they are not willing themselves to come up to it, but resolve to rest in a cheap and easy faith. The reason that we don't like the Christians who do things the way they're supposed to and love God the way they're supposed to is because we don't want to step up to the plate because we know what it will require. We don't want to sacrifice. We don't want to give up. We don't want to bow down. We don't want to push ourselves out of the way because we know how hard and difficult that is. And so we look at those people who love God with their whole heart, mind, and strength, and we say to them, yeah, you're a little bit crazy. You're crazy. I appreciate that you love Jesus, but just go your way and I'll go mine, and this is good. And we write them off because we don't want to step up to it. We like the idea of a cheap and easy faith. It requires nothing of me, and it's a piece of cake to walk through. I come to church on Sundays and hang out, and that's the kind of faith I want.